The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. We all rise for the Honorable Judge Bangs.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The Long Good Friday versus Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. The Long Good Friday is a 1980 British crime drama about a Cockney crime boss who finds his would-be empire threatened from within by a traitor and from without by the IRA. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is a 1998 British crime comedy about a small-time card shark and his three friends who find themselves deep in debt to a powerful crime lord and must therefore pull off a heist against the local street gang next door. Now, in civil cases like this, the counsel appointed to represent each film will present their case for why their client is the superior movie, and ultimately the jury will render its verdict as to which is, in fact, the better film. This decision will hereby stand in all rankings and listicles from now until the end of time ad infinitum. Professor Jeremy Black, MBE, you are appearing on behalf of The Long Good Friday. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Bailiff. Can I start off by saying how marvellous it is to have a programme of this type and to remind us that beyond the world of COVID, there were great films made and hopefully more will go on being made. But I also want to actually say what we're both talking about are essentially crime films. And one of the things that's very interesting is I personally like going to the cinema, but it's also worth saying that at the present moment, quite a lot is being produced on television, in serials that are really of very high quality, some of which I would say as of film quality. I've been watching quite a few of the French ones, which are marketed by a company called Walter Presents. I have nothing to do with no financial interest. I'm not an influencer, none of that sort of crap. But I just wanted to say that actually one of the interesting things is how crime has become almost more universal now, because you don't need to go to the cinema to see in your own drawing room, really quite expert, marvellously made films. Now that takes me to The Long Good Friday. 1980, as you know, it was voted by Empire in 1997 as the best British movie ever. And I think the reason for that is, first of all, a fantastic central performance. Bob Hoskins gives the performance of his life. He is a great actor. You will know him in other films like Mona Lisa, which in some respects takes, The Long Good Friday forward and gives you a much harder edged, in some respect, view of London. But The Long Good Friday is also interesting, and I want to talk about that when I have a bit more time on this programme, because what it tells us about Britain changing, but also, and one of the reasons it should interest American audiences, is in practical terms, it's also talking about how American cities changed as well. So that's where I want to leave it at the moment. I'll listen to the opening remarks made by my colleague, and then we can press on.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appearing on behalf of Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is Mr. Dylan Jonathan Schlender. Please present your opening statement.
All right, you geezers, listen up, listen up. I may be a simple American prat, but I can sure tell you that British mob movies leave me chuffed. So today we have Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, a group of dicey chavs getting their tiddlies winked by a sort of events, leaving them in a Timberly Longo. You don't have to butter the loaves to know what I mean, yeah? While The Long Good Friday features a tour de force from Mario himself, Bob Hoskins, we are left feeling a bit cold. Though I appreciate the anti-IRA sentiments, right group of tossers they are, come on Eileen to rule our RIA. Lockstock gives us blokes a cheeky feature that is fun to watch and follow. Focusing on that, we will come to the conclusion that Lock, Stock comes out on top in this head-to-head. Now, excuse me, will I get a cuppa and get simply trolleyed?
Thank you, Mr. Schlender.
That was Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins. Thank you so much, Mr. Van Dyke.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the extent of my British accent for the rest of the
Well,
show.
it's marvelous.
I doubt that. I doubt
It's marvelous.
If Jeremy likes it, that's good enough for me.
He's going to do it again.
Okay, I know. Well, I don't like it that much.
Exactly.
I was just trying to be pleasant. Let's not go too far down that line.
That's British politeness for you.
British politeness for you. Okay, can I just say something about Lock, Stock? And then
Jeremy, you can proceed with your first exhibit, so go ahead.
Okay, let's go. Well, my first exhibit is, in a way, we've been cheating because all of us have said, particularly you lot, I didn't start off saying this, that actually what is revealed is that the IRA is the real force that is undermining Bob Hoskins' empire. One of the reasons I think that The Long Good Friday is a very, very good film and better than Lock, Stock is you actually don't know what is going on really until the end. And I think that actually makes it a much more successful fusion of a film noir, an adventure film, and a film about a character played by Hoskins, who's really a man who's used to being in charge. It's his manor. He's the guy. He's the person, you know, the boy from Putney. He can control people. And yet there's this sense of growing failure of his world, his manor being put, you know, under threat. And he hasn't got the faintest idea why this is happening. Now, I think that's what really gives the film its edge, that there is an uncertainty there, definitely for the character, but also for the audience. So I'm sorry you told everybody who the villains were, because actually what really makes it go is that you don't know what the hell's going on in this film, but neither clearly does Hoskins.
You know, that is a good point, Jeremy. And like we stipulate in head-to-heads, we're talking about two good movies back and forth. So one of the things, though, I would like to say about the Long Good Friday is it does beg the question, who are we rooting for? Because Bob Hoskins plays a mobster, the IRA are terrorists, and the Americans are portrayed to be cowardly, though they're ultimately right at the end, I'll point out. And so, but what Lock, Stock had is there's no narrative confusion. Right? The road is twisty, but it's not hard to be along for the ride. We want the friends to overcome the challenges, and the serendipitous events just make things really fun for us in the audience. So I would say that use of dramatic irony, that is to say us knowing everything that's happening in Lock, Stock, makes it a lot of fun. And and to see that in like this kind of crime movie where we're all in on it at the beginning, it lets us have more fun with the movie, whereas The Long Good Friday, you find yourself kind of scrutinizing it a little too much. And I think maybe part of the problem with The Long Good Friday is that narratively, it starts too late. It starts on the Good Friday. You don't quite understand Bob Hoskins' character or his motivations. And I was thinking, well, that's just because the whole movie takes place on Friday. But the movie goes into Saturday, so it wasn't a time constraint. So they could have fleshed it out a bit more if they wanted to, in a way that Lock, Stock is able to establish the beginning, middle, and end, as opposed to coming in media res.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, what I would say is we're dealing with two films which, in the context of violence and London, take two different positions, each of which are also anchored in American cinema. Really, The Long Good Friday is, in some respects, a film noir. And I don't think it's any accident that its title is a homage to Humphrey Bogart and Raymond Chandler. And Lock, Stock, in many senses, is a comic caper plus attitude and violence. And in a sense, you know, it looks towards things like Ocean's 133 or wherever we're up to at the present moment, so it looks towards that. And, you know, that has a role. I mean, they're different roles. They please different groups of customers. I would like to think the market is big enough for both of them.
But not this courtroom.
Sorry?
Not this courtroom. This courtroom, okay, only one can stand.
I accept that point. But I mean, I've always rather liked film noir. In a sense, it's because a lot of the early films I watched were Hollywood films of the 30s, 40s, 50s, Edward G. Robinson, nobody has no idea what's going on. Gangsters are gangsters. It's not funny, you know? I mean, somebody might have a wise crack out of the side of their mouth, rather like eventually in Chinatown, but Chinatown, which in many senses is the great iconic modernization of that genre, is still pretty horrible and pretty horrific when you think about it, but it is a puzzle to work out what the hell is going on. So I think we've got different traditions. I mean, I think Lock, Stock looks back to things like The Thin Man and, you know, Myra Lowe and those kind of things, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's a different tradition. In Britain, you could say it looks back in a way to things like the Lavender Hill Mob, you know, those kind of Ealing comedies in which you do see villains, but the villains are not people you think, my God, they're going to cut your nuts off. I think partly it is a different film. I mean, you know, when you get Harry Shand hanging up the people he doesn't like in the abattoir for questioning, this is genuinely menacing. When you get somebody stabbed to death as this guy's stabbed to death in the swimming pool, this is menacing. It's not fun. It's not funny. It's not intended to be funny. And I think in a way, in the aftermath of the kind of rather soft, gentle, lovey-dovey kind of London of the 1960s films, things like Alfie and all those kind of stuff, you're being reminded that this is a hard-edged city where nasty things happen. And in a way, I think that was useful. The same thing when you get the reinvention in America, which I think is also a question of the film noir. Now, I think, you do get a reinvention of the film noir. Interestingly enough, in America, many of them have females, Glenn Close, Deborah Winger, as playing central characters. But they have to reinvent the film noir again, because what they want to do is to say to people, there is a nasty side out of this. It's not just cops and robbers. It's partly not being sure what the hell is going on.
A question from the bench. Do you feel that the comedy element of Lock, Stock undermines the genre of the crime film at all?
Well, no, I don't mind comedy. And I mean, I read a lot of detective novels. I mean, I actually quite like them when they have a comic dimension. I think it's different moods. I think we should all have different moods, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I understand where we're at. We have to pick between two very good but different films.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, as we did last time, I thought it was brilliant last time, but a lot of it was age-related, different senses. And surely that's one of the great strengths of film. One of the great strengths of film is it's a genre, a means, a medium that reaches out to just about everybody. I mean, nobody's going to say that of ballet, for God's sake, nor is anybody going to say that, despite the efforts to popularize opera. Nobody's going to say that about opera. But it's,
or opera.
It's certainly true. It's certainly true of film. And what we've got here are two really quite brilliant films. I mean, what's interesting to me, and one way that you can compare them, is to say, well, what do they do with the background of the urban mess, drama, theatre that is London? Now, you could have set it in New York. Both those plots could have been set in New York. In a sense, films have set those kind of films in New York. I would have thought for Americans, what's interesting is to see gangsters of that period who are not the mob. Mm-hmm. And I think actually that for both those films, it presents, they're neither a hard edge nor a comic caper in which the gangsters are the mob. I mean, obviously, as you were very nice when you talked about the Americans coming in the Long Good Friday. You do realize that's mob money that's coming in.
I have a whole argument defending the American mob, so I do understand it.
But the point is, I'm not attacking or defending. All I'm saying is it's interesting for for Americans to see this. You see, because what you've not got in these films are the equivalent of the recent films with Sherlock Holmes in, which is a kind of retread Britain of, dark corridors and, fog and people wearing funny outfits and, all the rest of it. These are each films designed to be seen as the London of the here and now. And in each of them, what you're saying is, what is the nature of the terrors, dilemmas, adventure, excitement of metropolitan life today? And I think each of them in their different ways capture that. And without bringing in, you don't need Gotham City. You've not got some weird extraterrestrial or human with supernatural or superhuman powers. And I think it works quite well. The interesting thing about the Hoskins film is what you're talking there is about an attempt to remake Britain. In a way, Hoskins is a crook turned property developer, the two seen as being closely linked, okay? And he's trying to create a new Britain, including his girlfriend, brilliantly played by Helen Mirren, living in a very modern kind of arty place. And what's interesting is that is seen as it were, very difficult to actually fight free of the past. I think that's one of the points about that film. It's that Britain might think that it's modernizing, but the past is there all over the place. But at the same time, the images of the past, the Rolls Royce, the London pub, they're getting blown up like nobody's business.
Jeremy, that was something I wanted to kind of bring up, and you've touched on some of it, but I want to kind of get you zeroed in. So I think The Long Good Friday does have a lot of commentary, maybe about London at the time, that maybe doesn't resonate today, and probably doesn't resonate with us being Americans. But like something I noticed, Bob Hoskins, he seems very concerned about the immiseration of the neighborhoods that are around him. You do feel
Counselor, can you define that word?
Immiseration is like economic downturn.
Thank you.
So he's seeing things kind of slip away. The one thing I thought was confusing as I was doing the research, though, is he was saying we've had 10 good years, right? So if you assume the movie is 78, 79, he's been saying it's been good since like 68, 69. But as I don't need to tell you, you had a huge energy crisis in 73. Yeah. You had the recession lasted all the way to 75. You had tons of labor issues with the trade unions gaining more power. And if he's going legit, he would have to deal with that. And that would have been very costly to him. And that's why we ultimately hear his lawyer is using Irish labor and that's how they get mixed up with the IRA presumably to circumvent those trade unions. So I feel, is Bob Hoskins confused? Am I confused? I feel like there's something getting lost in that translation.
Well, I think you're right. I'm not sure what they're on about there, so I'll start with that. Okay. It might be that they're implying that he's one of the gangsters that has come to the fore after the breaking of the big 1960s gangs. The two main 1960s gangs were the Krays north of the river and Richardson's mob south of the river. And both of those were broken by the police. And obviously what happens, same thing that happens in America, is, you get one lot of gangsters laid low, other people come forward. So maybe, I'm not sure about this, but maybe the suggestion is that he's a post Krays Richardson's gangster who's created his criminal empire. Remember, criminals can do well in economic recession as well as economic growth. But
he was going legit, though. That's the thing. So if he had legitimate interests.
He has got legitimate interests, but a lot of what's still going on is crookery, isn't it?
He is crooked as heck. I will give you that.
Yeah, he's crooked as heck.
I'm just saying, though, he said 10 good years, and there was a lot of stuff happening.
I agree with you. I think that's a very good point. As you may know, the film has also been used to talk about the Thatcherite years. Margaret Thatcher becomes Prime Minister in 1979, is Prime Minister till 1990. The development of London Dockland is a really major theme in her years. But the point is the film's wrong for that because it's slightly too early. So, in a sense, you get the usual laziness. A lot of historians are not very good. One of the things they don't often do is get their chronology right. And it's actually too early for the Thatcherite development of Docklands. So I'm not absolutely certain on that particular point. I agree with you at the very end of the 70s where they're scripting this. 1978, 1979 is the so-called winter of discontent. There is a sense of the country slipping into chaos and confusion. So it's the last thing you want to be thinking about is to say, we know that capitalism is going to work. Bluntly, the Labour Party in those years, the Labour opposition, particularly by 2 to 3 years after that in London, is moving in a very left-wing direction. So I'm just not quite sure that you should put the historical context as specifically, as deeply etched as one might. I was
hoping you would appreciate that.
I appreciate what you've done. I think you've done a marvelous job in drawing attention. What I think is really interesting is the human problem of a gangster, as you pointed out, trying to go legit. I don't think he's trying to go legit, trying to develop a legit side. Now, I've just been reading Henry Fielding's Life of Jonathan Wild, which is 1743. Jonathan Wild gets hung in 1725. He's one of the greatest early criminal gangster networkers in London. And he makes his money as a thief taker. In other words, he runs a criminal network, but he also makes money by, as it were, shopping criminals, both in his own network if he falls out with them, but more particularly in his rival's network, to the authorities, and gets money for that. And he also commissions crimes himself, and he runs a system in which he steals from people and then sells back to them at a discount the things he's stolen. And in a way, he's paying off corrupt justices of the peace, and he's in a sense above the system. And what's interesting, he attracted a lot of attention. I was reading the Fielding, but Daniel Defoe, for example, wrote a life of him as well. What's interesting is the way they present Wilde is here is a character who's a crook, but also wants to be a great man. In fact, Fielding is all about his aspirations to greatness, but the fact that he continues to slide back into criminality. Now, one way of looking at crime, of course, is to say that classically, writers about crime and the makers of film have exaggerated the strength of criminal networks and have exaggerated the extent to which there are master criminals, let's say Conan Doyle's Moriarty, for example, and Sarsfield's Fu Manchu.
Or the Big Four.
Sorry?
The Big Four.
The Big Four. So they've exaggerated those, and that the practicality is that it's much more chaos, confusion, thuggery. And in a way, both of the films we're talking about are in part about chaos and confusion and thuggery, the sort of arbitrary nature of extreme violence in a context which is far from organized. And ultimately, the only really organized group in what we're talking about, both films, is the IRA.
That's true. Because Bob Hoskins doesn't understand the IRA is operating right under his nose the whole time. That's the revelation at the end when he's driving in the car and they're zoomed in on his face. That's him. He finally put all the pieces together, and I'm like, well, you're dead now, so the Americans were right. The American mafia was right in that movie, so USA.
Yeah. Right, you're dead now. And the other thing that comes with that is he doesn't understand what his juniors are doing within the network.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know who to trust, and he doesn't have well-placed moles who can tell him what the other gangsters are doing. I mean, bringing them in like that is really pretty ridiculous, isn't it?
It is.
You ought to basically be able to find out what the hell's going on. So in a way, what you've got is a classically British disorganized criminal network.
Do you think you can draw parallels between Harold the mobster and his underestimation of the IRA and maybe what the UK's views towards the IRA were at the time too? Like, is that, are we reading too much into that?
Well, I think the security services knew that the IRA were dead trouble. I don't think the Americans realized how serious it was. I mean, remember, the IRA made 2 attempts to blow up successively 2 prime ministers, Margaret Thatcher with the Brighton bombing and John Major with the mortar attack on number 10. And I mean, these were pretty sensational things. And I remember being in New York in 1988, and a friend of mine took me to a bar just to show me what was going on, where, you know, there was open collection of money for Irish terrorists. I mean, they didn't call them terrorists, but it was a terrorist front organization. So I don't think the Americans quite understood what was going on. I don't think always people on the mainland, which is what we call, although it's an island, England, Wales and Scotland, understood about Northern Ireland, but the 1980s saw much more IRA terrorism in England, and that helped to make people realize much more what was going on.
All right.
Do you have any further points, Jeremy, you'd like to bring up?
No, I feel quite happy.
Oh, good. Well, then, if you've rested your case, we'll pass it over to Mr. Schlender to present his first exhibit.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeremy. Always great context and everything. So I'm just going to bring up a couple little points in favor of Lockstock. I'm happy to report that Mikis Theodorakis has returned to the podcast. His career is more discussed in episode 14, Faces in the Dark, with Larry Blameyer. But Lockstock features excellent samplings of Zorba the Greek and Zorba's Dance. And what these numbers are able to do, it brings us along for all the madcapery that ensues. Zorba the Greek going dun 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 dun, and then it builds up, and all of the insanity along with it, which is fantastic. And then you compare this to the score in The Long Good Friday, which is just bizarre to me because it's synth, sax, and bears, oh my. You know, I'm really not one to hang my hat on quibbles like scores and soundtracks, but I really feel The Long Good Friday, some of that synth and vamping just pulls you out of the mood, with one exception. When Bob Hoskins arrives, his intro music is sweet.
He has sweet music.
No, and he comes in looking like a boss. That really works. But that's the exception that proves the rule. That's the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. And then let me, what was this other point that I had? Okay. So I hinted at that I wanted to make this point. My last point is about respect. Who does Bob Hoskins think he is defaming the American mafia? We had Whitey Bulger, we had Al Capone, we have Al Pacino. Lockstock has no disrespect. The most disrespect we're treated to in Lockstock is the idea that Sting can throw a punch and not be intimidated by Vinnie Jones. Now, maybe there are events in London at the time that explain why Bob Hoskins was so delusional about a London-centric pretty much proto-European Union is what he's pitching at the end when he's talking to the Americans. And frankly, it sounds terrible. And then he's like, oh, I'm going to team up with the Krauts, you know? And it's like, well, we know how that works out because we live in the future. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, so watching that now, we could just kind of snicker at him and go, oh, Bob Hoskins, you're being so silly. And then he dies 2 minutes later.
Maybe.
Anyway.
Maybe.
So.
Yeah, maybe he dies.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think he does die, but I mean, you don't actually, it's a very good point. You don't see him die, which I think is a good end. I think that's a very good end.
Just point from the bench, both films feature vague endings that don't concretely tell you how the stories wrap up.
Yeah,
that's true. And so one of the things I'll say in favor of Lockstock, it eschews all this commentary for an extended party scene where we see Jason Statham do a backflip. I rest my case.
On Jason Statham doing a backflip.
Absolutely.
Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Jeremy, you may begin.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to say that it's a really good and exciting challenge to compare two excellent films. And really, we are looking at, chalk and cheese. I'm looking at a film noir. It's a film noir struggling to be up to date, struggling to be in color when so much of the film noir was a black and white operation. In a way, it's the British equivalent of Chinatown, which also is a great film, but also faces the challenge of taking the themes and idioms of the 40s and moving them forward. Now, I think my film succeeds in doing that. It is not better in that respect than the other film, because the other film is trying to do something very different. But I think film noir and modern film noir has a strong tradition. I think this is one of the classic examples of it. I think it is fantastically acted. And ultimately, I like it because one doesn't know what is going on, and because it is a puzzle, and a puzzle which you see also played through the face of this confused and resolute bully, but a bully who is being undermined in one of the most brilliant portrayals of the last 50 years on the screen.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Mr. Schlender, please present your closing arguments.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jurymen, today we are looking at a head-to-head. So take heart that neither movie is bad.
Yeah.
Let's just look at the facts. Bob Hoskins carries The Long Good Friday on his surprisingly toned shoulders. We know this due to his extended shower scenes. But Lock, Stock has an ensemble cast par excellence. It has a fun tone that does not diminish the stakes. Ultimately, think about what movie you want to watch again. Think about the sheer gall of suggesting that America's mafia is not the best in the world.
Shame.
Let us have some fun here today. Let's have more fun, because we've been having a blast already. It's great. And let's celebrate the triumph that is Guy Ritchie's magnum opus, the peak of the British mob movie. Today we can cheer for two good movies and acknowledge that, you know what, fun wins out today. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels wins today.
Yeah,
Thank
can
you.
I just add one thing? Sorry to cut back in.
Yeah, go for it.
No. I agree that Lock, Stock has a very good ensemble cast, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea that Helen Mirren isn't very good indeed. I think she is.
Oh, she's great, but Bob Hoskins carries that movie.
Oh, yeah, Bob Hoskins does carry it. The other thing which is fascinating is Brosnan, who usually was absolutely useless in his films, actually does manage to convey more menace in that film than he does in any of the James Bond films.
Order. We will not slander the good name of Remington Steele in this court.
Sorry.
Oh, man. We're going to have Jeremy
Mamma Mia
back.
myself.
Thank
Jeremy,
you
you'll
both.
have to come back and do a Pierce Brosnan Bond movie. That's what we'll do.
Well,
You can prosecute.
Good luck.
You can prosecute.
Thank you, everybody. Members of the jury, Mr. Robb Maynard, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. IRLRA, the irritated Ryan Luis Rodriguez Army. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine which film is the superior movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way, you buggers. Okay, I do like head-to-heads. We are talking about two good films, which I do like. The question for me, since these are doing very different things, is which one is trying to accomplish its goal better as far as being a comedy or being a film noir. So Mr. Ryan Luis Rodriguez, what did you think of the case?
IRLRA.
So, shut up. So Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels feels a lot like a Tarantino light. It's very much his kind of brand of kind of snarky awareness, but also hyper violent at times. Very much tough guys on a mission kind of thing. But in the case of The Long Good Friday, you have this potent, genuinely kind of hot button movie that feels just as relevant now as it did back in 1980.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, we're looking at two different takes on different time periods, but basically the same setting, which is the crime underworld of London. And both films definitely go at it from different directions.
It's a matter of tone. Like Lock, Stock is very much the irreverent version. Long Good Friday is very much the serious version.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the points that that Dylan brought up was about how wasn't sure how the mob would have 10 good years, and I thought Jeremy countered that well. Like, look at the Great Depression.
That wasn't even the piece I cared about. They spent like 10 minutes talking about it.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
But you look at the Great Depression, right? And Capone and all those guys, they were at their height during the Great Depression.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It was when everyone else was poor and broke that they were doing the best. So I don't find it hard to believe that they could have had 10 good years during an energy crisis, because if they can break the laws, they can get around that.
Yeah, but the trade unions.
Get out of here. You're not allowed in here. Performance-wise, the day definitely goes to Hoskins.
It definitely does. I mean, those guys are funny in their roles in Lock, Stock, but as far as like, it's more difficult to do what Hoskins is doing. It's not as difficult to do like these jokes that they're doing in Lock, Stock.
Yeah, especially for Hoskins.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Because Hoskins, he has to project strength, but at the same time, his ignorance reveals kind of his inherent weaknesses as a man, as a powerful figure. And
he's less bright. He's less bright than his woman, and he doesn't understand that. I think that's a very interesting point about it. That his woman has a better sense of what is going on, and in a way, that's quite modern.
Yeah, totally.
I'm hearing Jeremy Black in my head. It's nice.
Where is he?
sorry.
That's all good.
Yeah, and so. And the other thing that's impressive about Hoskins is that he can do that British accent, because as we all know, he's Dutch.
Oh, okay.
No, he's not. He's British. I don't know why I tell you jokes. But yeah, so Hoskins absolutely carries the day on his own. And I do agree, Helen Mirren's great. But a lot of the rest of the ensemble cast there kind of blends into the background. Like, I think all you really remember at the end of that film is Hoskins.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's not meant to be an ensemble film, though.
Right.
I mean,
no, exactly. It's not meant to be. Right. Whereas, but comparing that to Lock, Stock, which is an ensemble film, is the sum of the parts stronger than Hoskins?
I would argue no.
Elaborate, Ryan.
Because it's such a focused performance. It's such a it's such a kind of like a powerhouse thing that even because in Lock, Stock, you have all these kind of disparate elements that are then kind of strung together as one cohesive whole, but I don't think anything tops what exactly Hoskins is doing.
I mean, I think it's like Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. I mean, I deliberately used the Chinatown comparison because I think Jack Nicholson really is again somebody who you can see in his face, in his manner, how he's having to adapt to his realization and understanding that Chinatown is a frame of mind which you cannot escape. I mean, I think it's a brilliant portrayal by Nicholson. And in a way, I know Faye Dunaway's there, but in a way, everybody else drops down, but that still makes a great film.
Yeah, and they're similarly iconic. Hoskins and
similarly iconic, yeah.
Do you think like I thought Lock, Stock was more situationally funny rather than like the sum of these guys' performances, like with the way they're like sort of delivering their lines?
It's more about how the plot kind of threads together.
I think Vinnie Jones can't help but be hilarious.
Okay, I'll give him
like
that.
Jason
Statham, I was getting nothing off of him, really.
Statham hasn't quite, I think, blossomed at this point, right?
It's his first movie.
This is kind of the movie where he gets discovered, though. He it's not till he does John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars that he really steps into the forefront of the zeitgeist. This is I think this is one of our most challenging head-to-heads because they are different films. And how do you compare different films that deal with similar subject matter but so disparately? I don't know that serious is always what works for me, but like at the same time, Lock, Stock is just kind of so ludicrous and silly that
It's bubbly.
It's bubbly,
It's effervescent.
so it never really reaches menacing. I mean, even the Baptist and the Hatchet, who are arguably the really dark, menacing parts of it, they die in such a clown, funny little way that sort of undermines, any terror they had. I mean, if those two bumbling idiots, those stupid little gun sealers, could literally just walk into Harry the Hatchet's office and blow him away with a tiny pistol, what power did that man ever have?
A man gets beaten to death with a dildo. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. And then the ganja growers are armed with like airsoft rifles. It's unique. Ryan, what are you thinking?
I'm leaning towards Long Good Friday.
Okay.
Leaning.
And any button you want to put on that as to why?
No, I just want to hear what you guys have to say.
All right, Maynard.
Okay. A light thing on the score of the Long Good Friday. It is odd. It
is. Yeah, it's like
it's
planes,
one of those
and automobiles where it's just like the datedness of it takes you out.
The 80s were doing that. They were trying to like put in music that really, and this is very proto 80s still, but it's like we're slightly ahead of its time really for 80s music. Like, it was probably very edgy and
saxophone
at the point. But it always reminds me, like every time I watch The Untouchables, there's like a bunch of weird synth in it that's just like, why did you do a 1930s era film with a bunch of synth? It
was in, man. It was in. You just had to be there.
Yeah, like that. It's bizarre. But still, Bob Hoskins' theme does rule in that. Since Ryan went one way, I'm gonna go the other. I'm gonna go Lock, Stock. Vinnie Jones is such a badass. I love Vinnie Jones. There's a lot more directorial flourish there. We called it kind of Tarantino light, but sort of, the Long Good Friday shots seemed more like, just kind of point and shoot and capture the action. I didn't see a lot of style so much in it that I can recall. Wasn't bad. It was just, it was very understated. So I think the directorial flourishes of Lock, Stock will put it over for me. So I'm going with Lock, Stock.
Well then as to the question, as far as which one does their job better as to what they're trying to accomplish, I kind of thought Lock, Stock, while funny situationally, didn't always hit its marks for me. Whereas Long Good Friday pretty much always hit the tone, at least it was going for. So for me, as to what it was trying to accomplish, it's the Long Good Friday.
Hey, both good choices. No wrong answers here. So Ben, you want to go out and tell that very
he's handsome.
He's so handsome. Much more handsome than Dylan.
Hey,
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the Long Good Friday versus Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, we find in favor of the Long Good Friday.
The verdict is so rendered, Mr. Schlender. I'm sorry. The Long Good Friday is
I'm storming out.
Is officially recognized as being the superior movie. Ordinarily, I would order that Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels pay 500,000 pounds in damages, but unfortunately, Vinnie Jones and his menacing son said if I did, he'd break my legs. Ooh. So, therefore, the court is adjourned.
This is Phil McCracken reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Jeremy Black, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, I think the jury was absolutely right, but I think that's a vote for Bob Hoskins, and I think it is a vote for the continued fascination of film noir. And what I would like to say to people is film noir is not primarily a business about cutting up bodies and looking at body parts in the equivalent of Patricia Cornwell novels. What film noir is about is uncertainty, and it's about how uncertainty brings together brilliant plots, great casting, and fantastic acting. And I think you see that in Chinatown. I think you see that in The Long Good Friday. And I hope that we can go on seeing it in other films.
Thank you very much. And here comes Dylan J. Schlender. Excuse me, could we get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
Well, you know, when you do head-to-heads and you have two really good movies and then you have such a good opponent in Jeremy Black here, it's hard to be mad at the loss. But that said, I'm furious. I'm leaving the show forever. Good day, sir. I am done. Don't try calling me.
Jeremy, we have an open position on the show. If you're interested.
Thank you very much. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good case. Good case.
So, if anyone's wondering how I knew about the energy crisis and the trade union strikes in England at the time, I read a book that my friend wrote called A History of Britain, 1945 to Brexit.
Oh, that's me. That's me. Oh, wow.
So there you go. So if you're interested in that period, Jeremy wrote a book about it because he's written a book about
an American publisher. So there we go.
That's right. Indiana University Press came out in 2017. Great book. So there you go. Like, if you're interested in something that's happened in the past, Jeremy's written about it. Just you'll find it.
Oh, well, that's kind. Actually, the latest Indiana one is on tank warfare. That might be of interest to some of the listeners.
Is that the one with the? Was that just on the tanks, or I know you did one recently with maps of World War II.
World War II and maps.
That's a different one. Yeah. No, I did one just on tanks.
I can't keep up with the number of books you produced. You were here about 3 months ago, I think. Alone, so. Yeah, you were here 3 or 4 months ago. How many books have you written in between?
I don't know. It's a crime to trees. It's a crime to trees.
Well, I think you can get them. Probably you can get them digitally too, if some people are interested.
Yeah, you can get them digitally.
Before we move on, I do want to add: we didn't plan this out, but there is one actor who appears in both of these movies.
There's two, Ryan.
Two?
Yes.
Okay.
Harry the Hatchet is also Razors in Long Good Friday, but I believe the chef character, one of the four, is the young boy who's threatening Bob Hoskins at the car.
Yeah, that's right.
That's really how we base this head to head.
It's not. It was a complete coincidence. Jeremy wanted to do Long Good Friday. I just opened up British crime movies, gave him a list. He picked that. But I think Guy Ritchie was highly inspired by Long Good Friday. That's the only reason I would think he would cast two of the actors back in it.
I think that's a very interesting point, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's a really interesting point.
I think it's too much to be a coincidence.
Yeah, you're right. And also because the pool, as in America, is enormous. Whereas if you look at the Danish films, it's always the same 5 actors and actresses doing absolutely, the people in Borgen are always the people in the recent film about 1864 and so on and so forth. But yeah, you have a lot of choice for American or British films in casting. So I think that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. So what else has been keeping you busy, Jeremy? What else is coming up in the future?
I've got coming out, I've been writing a book on Sherlock Holmes. And that's going to be published by Rowman and Littlefield. So that's an American publisher. And I'm also doing a book which is coming out from an American publisher called The Importance of Being Poirot.
I'm looking forward to that one. I've been reading the Hercule books on your recommendation, Jeremy. I've been enjoying them immensely, so I'll be interested to read that one when that comes out.
Yeah, and if you
I'm always interested to see them when they come out too. Yeah. When you write the bloody book and then they take forever to go through production and all the rest of it. And when you see it, and what is always funny is when you see it, people ask you questions about it, and you think, I knew that 10 months ago or a year ago, but I'm thinking about something else. But no, don't laugh. But I do a country series, and I've published Spain and Portugal and Italy, and I've been asked to do none other than your own great country, which would be interesting because American history in 80,000 words, trying to work out what to say about it will be very interesting.
So many prostitutes.
We are available.
Like 200 years, right?
We are available sources, Jeremy. You can interview us and pump us for whatever American knowledge you need.
Well, the interesting thing is I'm writing it primarily for British audiences.
Oh.
but I want Americans to think, well, he's not completely nuts, or he's not totally stupid.
If you tell the truth about American history, most Americans won't recognize it.
Boo.
It's not what we were taught.
We were the heroes in that, weren't we?
Yeah, exactly. No,
Actually,
that's
You've
great.
never done anything wrong.
Well, how are you going to? You've written about the American Revolution
I have.
before, though. So,
No,
like,
no,
are
no,
you?
this is the whole of bloody American history.
Mm.
I shall probably say a fair amount about the role of geography. But
That's important.
I've just got to think about how to do it, and I've just got to think about it, because what I don't want to do is get involved and then President Taft did this. It's no interest.
Hey, dollar diplomacy was huge, and we have Taft to thank for that. Okay,
I would just skip Taft.
I mean, the details of whether you went on or off the silver, or that kind of thing. Is really just so arcane.
That was the whole basis of Huey Long's campaign. You're leaving out so much stuff, Jeremy.
He's only got 80,000 words.
I've seen the place in Baton Rouge where Huey got shot.
Yeah, that's true. He did get shot. Jeez.
But it's very interesting because they discussed there whether he was actually killed by, there was the guy who went to confront him about how he treated the guy's father. And allegedly killed him. But there's also the argument that Huey Long got killed accidentally, well, we can discuss that, by one of his bodyguards in the exchange of fire. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
It's always, whenever someone gets a shot or assassinated, there's always the theory that a bodyguard accidentally did it. There's the same theory for JFK. So I don't know.
Yeah, but the difference with JFK is a simple one. JFK was in the open air, in the middle of nowhere. Too. I mean, in the sense that shot, if it missed, would go all over the place. Huey Long was in a really tight corridor where, any rapid firing, gun is going to ricochet, the bullets are going to ricochet all over the bloody place. I mean, it was really tight in there, and it was crowded. Because he was moving along surrounded by people, and this other guy comes to confront him. And I mean, it was a crowded, tight, poorly lit place. I mean, it's almost certain, in my view, that he got killed by the guy, but it's equally possible that he got hit by others as well.
That's true. It could definitely be.
There's always more than one version of any U.S. history. And if you need an interviewee for Poirot, I've played him on this very podcast.
Right.
So I feel that got in his head.
But it's lovely to chat to you.
We just before you go, can we get a recommendation for a movie you think people should see?
Oh, what, at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I haven't been able to go to the cinema because they've been shut in Britain, but I did see Mank, the Herman Mankiewicz one, and I thought that was well done. For me, it was interesting because I actually in 2000 visited St. Simeon, Hurst Castle, and it was fascinating to see the film. I thought the acting was superb, and I liked the black and white, and there is a film noir component to it. So I really liked that film. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I saw that one. I liked it too.
Awesome.
I enjoy Citizen Kane. Dylan, you were the other counselor, so what kind of recommendation have you got for us?
Well, as we all know, it is my duty to recommend every Charles Bronson movie that's ever been made. And just like these movies were uniquely British, I'm recommending a story that can only happen in America, and that was Messenger of Death from 1988, directed by none other than J. Lee Thompson, starring none other than Charlie Bronson, who plays an intrepid reporter, but don't worry, he still beats up a lot of people, who's investigating a murder. He's a Denver reporter who's investigating a Mormon turf war, but there might be other forces at play than just Mormons trying to kill each other. It's an interesting mystery. Yes, there are actually. It's the Colorado Water Company. It is. Oh my goodness. You want to talk about a hacker. But this one, it might be like in the top tier of my Bronson review movies. Like I'll be watching this again. I might even be watching it when we're done recording, to be honest with you.
My hometown.
Now, when you said uniquely American and Charles Bronson, I thought you were going to recommend Death Wish 4, The Crackdown.
Oh, no, that's next week. Unless we could do 2. I'll recommend The Crackdown. I've talked about it before on the show.
Dylan specifically limited to 1. Well, let's see. I was the judge, so I guess I will go next. And for my recommendation, I have to go with another crime film featuring the great Vinnie Jones. And because he is largely known for comedies, I basically have no choice but to go with Swordfish from 2001. Probably most popularly known as the movie where Halle Berry gets topless, it's also the movie where Hugh Jackman gets a jobby at gunpoint. It also features John Travolta just doing some John Travolta shit, and Paul Oakenfold bringing the techno jams in the soundtrack. As for finely tuned criminal intrigue and plot, this one doesn't really have any, but if computer hacking is the sort of thing that gets your adrenaline up, this one is for you.
This is a real hacker.
Did I mention Halle Berry gets topless? It's currently streaming on the Netflix. Yeah, pretty cool. Ryan, what have you got for us?
My recommendation this week is yet another Terrence Malick film. I think I'm at 3 so far. The Tree of Life from 2011. Have you ever sat down to watch a 3-hour movie and known within 5 minutes that you're going to savor every second? That's me watching a Malick joint, and this is no exception. Lyrical, hallucinatory, achingly human, aesthetically gorgeous. It's one of Malick's best. It's currently for rent on iTunes and Amazon Prime.
Ah, pretty sweet.
Lord of the Rings is the only time I've felt that for a 3-hour film.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with another
Big Ben, why don't you send us on home?
I'm going to go with another South Korean crime film. Although I guess it's technically more of a revenge film. It's A Bittersweet Life, which focuses on a hitman who disobeys orders, and that one action has a mob boss sending his whole organization to kill him despite a lifetime of loyalty. The film oozes style as it takes you into the Seoul underground with great visuals and great fight scenes.
Ooh, oozes.
Oozes. It oozes that
It's
style.
got movie pustules all over it.
I use something else, but it's not style.
That's all the time we have for show. We're all out of show for this week, but we want to thank our guest, Jeremy Black, for joining us. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Yeah, what should we do next? We've mentioned Zulu as one possibility.
Oh, yes. We'll do Zulu.
I mean, I'd be happy
what
to
put it
talk
up against.
yeah, well, that's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, for example, you could do, there was that American version, no, the Al-Fayed version of the 4 feathers or 3 feathers or 53 feathers or whatever. But that wasn't such a brilliant film, though it had a marvelous battle sequence. I don't know. It's a question. I think you benefit when there are a difference between the films so that they're both winners, if a sense. Because I think that's much more interesting for the audience if they're both winners. So you could pick an American equivalent. Or a French Foreign Legion equivalent. But I'd be very happy to do Zulu or to do other films. I mean, it's up to you. You think about what you'd like me to do. But I think this is great. I think it's fun. I'm just sorry I've not had the chance to meet you, chaps.
That's okay.
We'll get over to London.
Soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we hope everyone else will join us again soon, too, as the reels of justice keep turning.
Cheers.
Count it.
Cheers.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.